Now, we're faced with converging storms of environmental destruction, pandemic, disease, inequality, and the climate crisis. Heywood says so, and he says it's time for democratically elected governments to reclaim power and resources from elites, as well as to put human rights and the public and planetary interests at the heart of governance. Now, he also says over the years, countries have become richer. However, their governments have become poorer. He joins us now to discuss this even further. Heywood, thank you for your time and good morning to you. Let's start here and talk about what the data, or rather, the data at our disposal shows us or tells us. And I'm referring here to the World Inequality Report to be more in particular when it comes to global wealth disparity. How's it looking at this point?
Tumelo, I can't hear you, but I heard the first part of your question. This week on Tuesday, a group of economists based in Paris, including Thomas Piketty, released the World Inequality Report. And the World Inequality Report is a very, very meticulous and careful study of data from all over the world that looks at wealth and income inequality in particular, and the distribution or the fairness of the distribution of wealth and income inequality. And it's really quite shocking what it finds, because its sort of headline conclusion is that inequality in the world is now as bad as it was in 1910. That's 110 years ago. And what makes it even worse is that during the COVID-19 crisis, inequality, and by inequality we mean the difference between the rich people of the world and the poorest people of the world, has escalated enormously. And let me just give you two figures to illustrate that. Right. In 2020, the billionaires increased their wealth by $3.7 trillion. But in the same year, 100 million more people fell into absolute poverty. So I'm just saying, I said in the article, that governments need to act to tackle this inequality.
Mark, in your analysis, why do you think it's taken governments this long to see this huge gap between the elites and, poor governments, as well as, the poor generally in most of these countries? How have they allowed that financial or wealth gap, rather, is the word I'm looking for, to have gone for so long, but to also be this wide?
Well, they bought into failed economic arguments that if you reduce taxation on the very rich, that if you deregulate economies to give the ultra-rich the freedom to do whatever they want to do, that somehow that will stimulate economic growth, and that there will be a trickle down of wealth from rich people and from economic activity to poor people. In fact, the exact opposite has happened, which has been that there's been an upward rush of wealth and nothing going down to the poorest of the poor. So what this report says is that this is really a policy failure. It's a failure of government to do what they are supposed to do, including our government, to realize human rights and to address these inequality. The findings in South Africa, for example, are startling, which is that in South Africa in the last 20 years, the rich have got richer and the poor have got poorer. And most people in this country still have no wealth at all, still have no savings at all, whilst a tiny minority of people continue to get richer. And we've avoided means such as a wealth tax, such as increased personal income tax for the richest of the rich. And the consequence is that our government actually can't afford social programs.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the article that you wrote there for the Daily Maverick, Mark. I'm seeing they're highlighting at least two figures, very wealthy. Elon Musk, they're reported by Forbes to be nearly $300 billion US dollars. That's his worth. And of course, Bill Gates sitting at $136.5 billion in 2021. There's definitely a gap here. But you are also highlighting the importance of, restoring democratic governance and ending power, the power of elites. Just briefly before I let you go, how do you think this can be achieved?
Well, when we elect governments to act in the best interests of the majority of the population, not to act in the interests of the minority of the population. The problem today is that even though we have an election, popular will is diverted by people who say you shouldn't increase taxes, you can't introduce a basic income grant, you can't fund public healthcare services, you can't fund basic education. And what I'm saying is that when we elect our governments, we must say your first responsibility and duty is to the electorate. Your first responsibility, and this is important today because it's the 25th anniversary of our Constitution, is to a Constitution that says you must narrow inequality, realize social justice, and overcome the legacy of apartheid and discrimination in this country. These days, we're doing exactly the opposite. So we can't have a situation where, as the report says, countries get richer, but governments get poorer, and governments find themselves unable to address the crisis of poverty and inequality in our country.
Well, thank you for this thought-provoking conversation. Mark Heywood from Daily Maverick, thank you for your time this morning.